Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and this video is intended to be a comparison and dual review of both the 1974 novel Fletch, written by Gregory Mcdonald, as well as the 1985 film adaptation directed by Michael Ritchie, written by Andrew Bergman, and starring primarily Chevy Chase. The film also features Tim Matheson, Dana Wheeler-Nicholson, Gina Davis, Joe Don Baker, George Wendt, and Richard Libertini, among others. Let me start off by saying I'm a longtime fan of the film itself, having a history of interest in following the classic not-ready-for-primetime players that originate from Saturday Night Live onto their later film and TV careers. Chevy Chase is no exception to the rule, and he continues to be a point of hilarity and inspiration to me to this day, with his stint as Fletch probably being my favorite of all his characters. For a long time, though, it never clicked with me that the movie Fletch was actually based on a novel. In fact, a series of novels beginning in 1974 and following up through until the final tome to feature Fletch as its central character, Fletch 2, was published in 1986. Erwin Maurice Fletcher, as he is otherwise known, did, however, feature in two follow-up novels continued by originating author McDonald, wherein his son took center stage in 1992 and 93, respectively. Beyond the 9 total Central Fletch novels and the 2 follow-ups contending with Fletch's son, there was also a quadrilogy of spin-off novels featuring an inspector detective named Flynn, introduced in the second published Fletch novel, Confess Fletch. It was only in the last several months that I finally caught up with my curiosity over these published works, and as of the time of this recording, I've thoroughly consumed 6 of the novels in their entirety, all relatively quickly, I might add. The main brunt of the story, as it is written in the singularly titled Fletch, as well as its film adaptation counterpart, is that while cruising a California beach undercover in the hopes of busting up and bringing an end to the local drug trade circulating on the beach, investigative reporter Erwin M. Fletcher is approached by a well-to-do yuppie businessman named Alan Stanwyck, who immediately provides him with $1,000 merely to listen to a business proposition, which does not, as movie Fletch fears, entail his dressing up as Little Bo Peep. No, instead, once Stanwyck brings Fletch back to his swinging pad, a mansion in the California hills, does he elaborate that he'd like to hire Fletch to kill him, murder him within a week's time, so that he will not have to suffer in his final days, succumbing to recently diagnosed cancer. The murder, as it happens, would not nullify Stanwyck's life insurance, which seems to be his sole interest, where suicide most certainly would, as he wants his family well provided for when he's gone. Being ever the inquisitive mind, seeing as Stanwyck is operating against the rule that you should never, knowingly or unknowingly as the case may be, offer an investigative journalist money, as it will only spur on their curiosity and propensity to start digging, Fletch agrees to a deal that will see him inherit, or steal in this case, $50,000 to do the deed once it's all done. Stanwyck, not being a man who leaves very much to chance, has even worked out the details of the plan, which will see his murder having been a part of a robbery attempt on his house, as well as Fletch's ultimate escape route via an airline flight to Rio shortly after the deed is done. With this agreed, they part ways. Both the film and novel pretty much open with this aspect of the story, where only minor details, such as surrounding characters, doings, and placements from the novel have been omitted from the film and such. But the crux, Stanwyck's offering to pay Fletch, this unknown wandering junkie bum as he sees him, having spent a good deal of time watching Fletch, the seeming drifter, amble his way across the beach mingling with other of the junkie refuse, to kill him is a solid start for both versions. And from there spawns a dual line of inquiry in Fletch's investigations, continuing his seeking to pin down the source of the local drug trade, as well as to piece together the history and details of Alan Stanwyck's life, and prove whether or not his offer and disease are genuine. This is where deviations within such proceedings begin to show themselves between the novel and the film. One of the most stark aspects of which is novel Fletch is never leaving the state of California to proffer any investigation reconnaissance. Instead, unlike in the film, where movie Fletch hops a plane a couple times over to track down leads in other states, novel Fletch does a majority of his detective work over the phone. Most notably does this occur in the novel when Fletch attempts to make straight in his mind why it seems Stanwyck and his parents are estranged, according to some people, and very close, and seeing them regularly, according to others. In the film, Fletch visits Stanwyck's parents on their farm in Utah personally, under the guise of an insurance agent named Harry Truman. Yet in the novel, this same interaction under a different alias takes place in at least 3 separate events, entirely over the phone, with Stanwyck's parents living in Pennsylvania instead. While both of these lines of inquiry feature as their instigation Stanwyk's relationship with his parents, his potentially being ill, and the like, there also features the underpinning hint of Stanwyk's having a childhood sweetheart, which reveals one of the biggest deviations from novel to film, as the film depicts Stanwyk as having married his high school love Sally Ann Kavanaugh prior to his having married the daughter of a big airline firm in California, making him a bigamist. Whereas in the novel, Stanwyk did not marry Sally Ann, but their uniting, or rather their plans to unite by the novel's end, is not too far removed from the plans of their film counterparts. Another few of the chief deviations between the novel and the film revolve around Fletch's inter-office relationships, his ex-wives and their attorneys seeking alimony, and subsequent beach drug investigations. In the film, his editor is Frank Jaffe, played as the straight man to Chase's comic Fletch, the dynamic between them being truly endearing in an almost buddy cop vein. They don't get along, and yet they admire each other from afar and develop an almost perceivable friendship of sorts, whereas the novel features Frank in only one scene, and most other times as a passing mention between Fletch and his novel equivalent editor, Clara Snow, who plainly Fletch hates, with the feeling being mutual on her part. Clara is a somewhat vindictive character, not least of which because she has earned her place as editor by betting editor-in-chief Frank Jaffe, and she has an all-too-well-known career of disaster in every single job placement in the newspaper she's ever had previously. She's an inexperienced and utterly underqualified thorn in Fletch's occupational side. It is, in fact, Clara, and not Frank as it is in the film, who sets the local police onto Fletch when he's running late with his drug bust story, both events giving up his undercover status entirely, though in the film it is suggested as much more of an accident, Fletch's boss Frank being eager to get comment from the chief of police on the impending revelation of the drug source, whereas the novel shows Clara, whether through ignorance or sheer malevolence, has pinpointed Fletch to the police as their undercover reporter on the beach under the guise of its being for his protection, with both events leading to his subsequent arrest. Now, in the movie, the threat of death is made virtually crystal clear by the chief of police. His claim is that his officers have been floating the beach undercover for a while now and are about to blow it all wide open. When Fletch shrugs this off, he is dramatically brought to a jail cell and has a gun waved in his face, the chief ultimately promising it'll come off as a murder attempt self-defense play, which he then backs away from when Fletch agrees to leave the beach and drop the story altogether. The novel plays it a little bit differently. There is no dramatic murder threat, but the claims that officers are casing the beach remain. If there's any sort of threat, it is largely unspoken, or rather suggestive, as essentially Fletch is told not only to leave the beach, but to leave town all told, or else. Both depictions of this event leading Fletch's curiosity as to just how involved the chief of police really is in the ongoing drug traffic. In the novel, there's much more time spent on the beach, through Fletch's eyes as the character of a junkie drifter. We're introduced to the tragic Bobby, a novel-only character, and a girl whose days addicted are effectively numbered, to Gummy, Fat Sam, and Creasy, all of which feature to varying degrees in the film as well, and are central, at least in the case of Gummy and Fat Sam, to uncovering the connection between the drug traffic and the chief of police in both versions. While said connection is effectively made between the two incarnations of the story, however, again, minor details deviate between them. In fact, there is one big overarching deviation to this aspect of the story as it relates to the investigations into Stanwyk's purported cancer diagnosis. Fletch, in both the novel and the film, takes the opportunity to get close to Stanwyk's airline heiress wife to pinpoint the accuracy of his claims. The novel sees his mingling not only with her, but her father, the company owner and founder as well, at their tennis club. Joan Collins Stanwyk, as she's known in the novel, and Gail Stanwyk in the film, paints two entirely different pictures between the two incarnations of herself, her family, and life with Alan, as well as his history. Joan is much more willing to have a dalliance with Fletch, who's introduced himself under an assumed name as having been an old flyer buddy of Alan's, whereas the film scale is much more innocent, if entirely bored and lonely, and not immediately given to jumping Fletch's bones. However, one thing leads to another in both incarnations, and eventually they end up in bed together. Gail only succumbing to movie Fletch's charms after the revelation her husband has another previous wife to whom he is still married. The big overarching deviation I mentioned in relation to all of this, between the novel and the film versions, is how these two seemingly largely unrelated events, the Alan Stanwyk murder proposition as well as the beach's drug traffic, play off of or intertwine and altogether end depending on which version you're dealing with. Without wanting to spoil all of the details of the mutual culminations of the story, suffice to say not all is as it seems at first look, and the novel keeps these two overarching narrative elements entirely at arm's length, whereas the film sees fit, and quite expertly does so, to marry them in a clever way by the end, to the point that, sacrilegious though it may be, you get the feeling that the movie told the story in a much better, more streamlined and entertaining way. Not least of which did the film enhance Fletch's character through Chevy Chase's dry-witted and endearing portrayal, but also did it wrap up the mutual ongoing plots in one fell swoop. For the most part, the movie's cast of characters are well represented by the actors cast in their particular roles, from Tim Matheson's enterprising Ellen Stanwyck to Dana Wheeler-Nicholson's gorgeous and doe-eyed innocent Gail Stanwyck. Richard Libertini's Frank Jaffe is the pinnacle straight man foe and boss to Fletch at all. Perhaps the most wasted screen time being the derivative amalgam character of Gina Davis's Larry. Whereas there is no such character in the novel, there are instead a few other characters who help Fletch through his investigative legwork. Davis's Larry does this too, but to a much smaller degree, lending her role in the film to being little more than a punchline. Fletch, when hanging up at the end of a call with her, says to the ambivalence of the hotel matron overhearing it, "I love your body, Larry," because he's implying he likes another man. Waka waka. The film really captured the action, comedy, and edge-of-your-seat qualities that the originating story doesn't seem all too concerned with, the novel's emphasis being much more laid toward the unwinding of multiple mysteries at a much slower, more methodical pace, whilst also endearing the reader to Fletch's offbeat, rebellious, bohemian sensibilities. The novel is not without its crisp wit, however. In fact, the character interplay, most notably through its quickly paced dialogue, is quite entertaining, to the point of making the reader laugh out loud on occasion. This being a common element throughout all of Gregory Mcdonald's Fletch novels, as I've yet had the pleasure of thumbing through. If you're a fan of the film and curious about the novel from which it was adapted, I'd highly recommend picking it up. You can do so rather cheaply through Amazon. However, I'd say that if you're not readily accustomed to sitting down and reading a book, you may at first be put off by the idea, and segments of the novel might not move as briskly for you as the movie does. With this said, however, Gregory Mcdonald is adept at still maintaining an albeit diminished compared to the movie, crisp pacing in each of his novels. They're gripping and lead the reader much less often to wanting to set down the tome at any given time, as they're dying to see what ultimately happens next from page to page. One final note I'll personally mention is that Chase's Fletch gets away with a lot more in the film at the expense of uptight tennis club-going Underhill, charging an entire $400 lunch bill and a trip to Rio, allegedly and unknowingly through Underhill via his expense account. This is almost hilariously undercut in the novel as merely being down to 2 drinks at the club, but I always got a mad kick out of that. In fact, this entire review was brought to you by the Underhill's credit card. Want the number? Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this in-depth look at both the film and novel incarnations of Fletch, and I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below whether you've ever read the Gregory Mcdonald classic and whether you'll be picking it up and checking it out if not, whether you've ever seen the movie and what you thought of it if you have. And otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. I hope this video finds you well. I'll catch you all later. Peace. Bit by bit, one way or another, bit by bit, no.